Well, this past week, Dane and I were heroes. We went to New Hampshire. Dane wanted to go skiing. This is his senior year. He wanted to go on a ski trip. And one of the ways we made that happen is Mary and I decided to talk to these people about a timeshare opportunity. And we got to do it in the fall, and unfortunately we passed on the opportunity, which they said was an opportunity of a lifetime. But we got an incredible deal on a condo in New Hampshire. And I hadn't been to New Hampshire in several years. My roommate college was from New Hampshire and went there at that time. But we got to go up there, and it was beautiful. It was, didn't get the message, it was spring break. It was nice and snowy. And one of the cool parts about this part of New Hampshire is it's about 25 miles from Vermont and 25 miles from Maine. And Mary and the kids have never been to Maine, so we decided we were going to go see what Maine was like. I've been there a couple of times in my life. And we go to this little place called Fryeburg, Maine. And we go to a nice little restaurant. If you're ever driving through Fryeburg, Maine, anybody going to be driving through Fryeburg, Maine? There's no reason to, but there's one restaurant, I think, that was open, and it was nice, and we enjoyed a meal, and we came straight back home. Well, as we went back home, we were driving down the Kankamangas Highway. This is the highway that bisects Vermont and Maine. And it's a beautiful highway that goes through the White Mountain National Park. And as we're driving through this, we go up through the mountain pass, and we get to see these beautiful scenes in the forest as it is nice and snowy. We're about 5 miles from home. As you see right here, this big tree fell in the middle of the street. Well, we couldn't see the tree yet, and we just see two cars that are parked out on both sides, and we're wondering, why are these people stopped? And as we drive a little bit further up, we had these two guys in the road. One of the guys that's going eastbound to Maine, he just turns around and goes back. But there's no turning back because there's no shortcut off of this road. So I get out of the car, and I look at the guy, and I said, well, I guess we're going to have to move it. And he says, we're not going to be able to move this tree. I said, I've got a power lifter in the car with me. We're going to be just fine. And so Dane, he's putting on his shoes. Finally, he gets out, and he's like, oh, yeah, we'll be okay. And so we start moving this giant tree out of the way. And then this guy, he's coming, eastbound. He gets out, and he's just throwing his hands up in the air like, what is taking so long for y'all to move this tree? And he says, I guess I'll just help a little bit. And he picks up one branch, and then finally when he sees his lane is clear, he says, I don't have time for this. And he gets in his car and just flies off. And I start thinking, well, that wasn't very gracious. I'm not even a local here. And I'm helping you out. I'm giving of myself to your little community, and so I could get home. We got most of it moved out of the way. We called 911, said, there's still some of the tree in the westbound lane. And I figured someone would be sent out, but we go 2 miles down the road. And then 2 miles down the road, we're stopped again, this time by a fire truck. And there's some down power lines, or they're hanging really low. And I thought, how much am I going to give of myself today? Not enough to help with the power lines. We'll let someone else deal with that, right? How much are you willing to give of yourself? What does it mean to give enough? What does God ask of us to give to Him, to give to the poor, to give to those in need? As we go to this part of the Sermon on the Mount, which we've been studying, we are coming to a lesson on giving. And sometimes people will get a little uncomfortable with this lesson. Why is the preacher saying he needs our money? Well, I'm not asking for any of your money. But I am asking for us to start thinking about what it is like to have a giving heart and what that does for us. What does it mean to be a generous person? And what does God want from us? And in this lesson, I think we'll be able to look at what we should be giving, how we should be giving, how we shouldn't be giving, and basically how often we should give. And so Jesus starts in Matthew chapter 6, verse 1. He says, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven." So Jesus starts this part of the sermon out with, be careful in how you practice your righteousness. And that's an interesting way to rephrase it. What exactly does Jesus mean by righteousness? If I was to ask you, what's a righteous person? You might have an idea in your head what you think a righteous person might be. Maybe you think, well, that's a good person that's nice to others, that helps others. Maybe a righteous person doesn't lie, cheat, or steal. Maybe a righteous person in your mind is someone that shows up to church on Sunday mornings. Maybe a righteous person is someone that spends time in prayer. One of the interesting things here is if you look at the word righteous, or the word that Jesus says is righteous, it's the word in Greek that is called dikaiosune. Dikaiosune. And basically what that means in dikaiosune is fulfilling the requirements of God's law. We talked about God's law several weeks ago. So if we are to be righteous, we are called to fulfill the requirements of God's law. And one of the things that we're going to talk about here is righteousness means giving. And we'll talk about how we got there. But another way that dikaiosune is described is in Matthew chapter 3, verse 13. It says, "Then Jesus came from Galilee to Jordan to be baptized by John. But John tried to deter him, saying, 'I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me?' Jesus replied, 'Let it be so now. It is proper for us to fulfill all righteousness,'" or all dikaiosune. Then John consented. If you've come to this church for a little while, you probably will understand we put a good bit of emphasis on baptism. We believe in baptism is where we come in contact with Christ's death, burial, and resurrection. And so baptism is part of our righteousness that we follow. And that is a very important part of righteousness. But one of the other parts of righteousness that we follow are going to be displayed in these chapters of what it means to practice the righteousness of God. Now you might be reading from the King James Version. And if you read from the King James Version, you're going to not read righteousness at all. But you'll read words that might be a little bit hard that say, "Take heed that ye not your alms be before men, to be seen of them, otherwise ye have no reward for your Father which is in heaven." And so instead of righteousness, it uses the word alms. Has anyone ever heard of the word alms here? We don't use that too much, especially in our tradition. Now there's other traditions that will use the word alms, and they'll even use the word almsgiving. So what does alms mean? Alms is basically charitable giving. So why does the KJV say alms and most other versions use righteousness? Well, it's an interesting way how the KJV got their translation. KJV uses a Greek translation that's reliable, but it's not as old. It's probably a translation that's made after 400 AD, while most other translations use the Greek that is probably in anywhere between 50 to 100 AD. So it's not the original manuscript, but what they have done is they took what the scribes do as little notes on there. And when they asked the question, well, what is righteousness? They said, well, righteousness is almsgiving, which is charitable giving. And why they came up with that is because right after here it's going to talk about our charitable giving. And so this is what Jesus is going to tell us. How we live in righteousness, how we do our charitable giving. He says in Matthew chapter 6, verse 2, "When you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do, in the synagogues and in the streets, to be honored by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand's doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. One of the things that Jesus is saying is, when we give to others, we're not giving as a show. We're not called to toot our own horn. Maybe that's where that term came from, is Jesus is saying, look at what I'm doing. I'm tooting my own horn. A trumpet should sound when I give something so generously. And some scholars even say that in synagogues, people would come and they'd give their gift, and if they gave a big gift, a big loud trumpet was blasted so everyone could see who was giving the big gift. Now, most scholars would say that didn't actually happen. And what Jesus is doing is using a little bit of a metaphor, like saying you're tooting your own horn. We're never called to give as a show. That's never something that we're called to do. And Jesus says, as a matter of fact, we're not supposed to do that. What's been interesting is we've switched from passing the plate around to giving online. Some people will do either. Some people put it in the box. People have a little bit of a strange feeling about, well, what does it mean if we just gave online and no one saw us giving? Well, that's okay. We're not called to be seen to give by others. We're not called to show that to others. It's not wrong, but it's a hard issue. And what Jesus says is the people that are trying to be seen by others when they give, they're hypocrites. And when we think of a hypocrite is typically someone that tells you not to do something that they are doing. So Christians sometimes are looked as judgmental and hypocritical because we say, don't do this. And yet we do the same thing we say not to do. But what Jesus is using is probably not the way we think of hypocrite, but the way they used the word hypocrite back then. And a hypocrite was the Greek term for an actor. It wasn't necessarily a mean term. It was a term that this person is being an actor. They are playing a role. And why do actors play a role? They play a role because they want to get applause from the audience. When I went over to Greece and Turkey, I went to lots of different stadiums where lots of actors played, and there were lots of people that went to go and give their applause. And Jesus is saying, giving has nothing to do with being an actor. When we give to others, we don't do it for applause, we don't do it for praise, we don't do it for a good attaboy. We do it because our hearts want to give back to God in some way. There's two different types of ways we can give in the church. Two different types of righteous giving. One of the ways that we give is something that was practiced in the Old Testament for sure, called a tithe. And if you've ever heard of a tithe, basically that just means giving 1/10 of what you make. So if you made $1,000 a week, you would give $100 as your tithe, as your 1/10 of what you made back to God. And this is a decent practice. This is saying that I understand God's blessed me, everything that I've been blessed with. I'm not having to give all of it back, but I give back the 10th to God to show that I trust in Him and I honor Him for blessing me. The other way that we practice giving is in our almsgiving. And almsgiving is giving to charity. And sometimes the tithe in the church does help give to charitable organizations. So, like one of the things that our congregation does with our contribution is we help out children's homes. One of the things that we do every Thursday, where Debbie, she's back. She helps cook a meal, and we put some money together for a meal, and we feed about 150, 200 students every Thursday. That's almsgiving. That's an act of charity. And some of the charity goes through the church, and some of it is something on your own, where you help out someone in need, or you help out an organization that's in need. So the two righteous givings are tithing and almsgiving. But God wants us not to look at this as just a certain percentage of how we should give to others. What God wants when He wants us to be givers is He wants our heart. So Jesus tells a story about what it means to truly give to Him, to truly offer righteous giving. In Mark chapter 12, verse 41, it says, Jesus sat down opposite of the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowds putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. Calling His disciples to Him, Jesus said, "Truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she gave out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." What's so important about this story? It wasn't the amount that the woman was giving. It was where her heart was when she gave. She gave everything. And what that showed was this woman was willing to put her trust in God. And this is a hard lesson for us because it's very difficult to put your trust in anything other than what the world tells us to put our trust in. And that's our money, right? Do we have enough savings? Do we have enough to get us by? And the problem with money is there's never enough. Several years ago, this is an alleged story. I don't know if it's actually true, but people put this quote to John Rockefeller. And they asked him, he was an oil and gas tycoon, and they said, "How much money is enough money?" And what's his answer? Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. And whether he actually said that or not, this is what we think. We need just a little bit more to help us get through. And we struggle because we put so much trust in this money that's coming in. I love that our founding fathers, or whoever it was that put the money together, they put a little quote on there that says what? "In God we trust." Every dollar bill that you have in your wallet will say, "In God we trust." And some people say that needs to be removed from the dollar bill, and if that was ever removed, Christians would be enraged. But do we practice "In God we trust"? Is that something we truly trust in, or do we cling to it? It's very hard to release money from our grasp. We want to hold on to it. And what Jesus tells us later on in the Sermon on the Mount is He reminds us where we're trying to build our treasures. In Matthew 6, verse 19, He says, "Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourself treasures in heaven where moth and vermin do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Jesus knows we try to put treasures for ourselves here on this earth. We refuse to release that money in our hands because we're worried what our life will be without it. And what Jesus tells us is everything that's here on this earth is just going to become destroyed. Moth and vermin destroy it. Rust will take over it. And then He tells us in verse 22, He says, "The eye is the lamp to the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness?" And one of the things I think Jesus is talking about is He's going for our eyes and He's saying, what are you looking for in this life? Are you looking for the things of this world? Are you looking for righteousness? Storing treasure in heaven. Storing a life that's eternal, that will not corrupt. He finishes it with verse 24, "No one can serve two masters. Either they will hate one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Now, when Jesus talks about money, he never says that money is an evil thing. But serving money is evil because it never will get us to where we want to be. There always needs to be just a little bit more. Mary and I have been married for 24 years. And we are in a time where we're making more money than we've ever made in our entire lives. And yet, the same thing has happened year after year after year. The money sure finds a way to leave our bank account as quick as it gets in. Maybe you deal with that too. No matter how much money we have, it finds its way out. And I think that's one of the things that Jesus is trying to tell us is, you can't rely on this. Jesus knows that it takes money to further His kingdom. He takes money to help those in need. But can Jesus do it without our giving? He can. Jesus doesn't need us. Do we realize that? Jesus doesn't need us to further His kingdom. Jesus doesn't need us to give to Him. But here's what I think Jesus does. And here's what I think God does is He uses people that are willing to put their trust in Him. If our congregation isn't willing to put our trust in Him, do you think He's going to use this congregation to further His kingdom? I can't imagine how He would. If you're not willing to put your trust in Him, why would He use us? Why wouldn't He just use someone else that's willing to trust in Him? A giving sermon is a tough sermon for a preacher to give, especially a preacher that gets his salary from the congregation. And I understand when we think about this, all of us are struggling in one way or the other. Some of us are doing well and some of us are struggling, but all of us have an issue with financial gain and releasing the money that we have. And I upload our sermons onto YouTube, and I'll get comments from complete strangers because anyone can watch it on YouTube, and they'll talk about how you're an evil church. They have nothing to say about us. They just are churches in general, because there are preachers and there are churches that are corrupt with the way they spend the Lord's money, the money that was given to the church, the money that was given to God. But I will say 18 years ago, I decided to come to Chandler Street. 18 years ago, I worked in the corporate world. I had a nice job, not incredibly well-paying job, but it was a nice job. And to come to Chandler Street, I took a 25% pay decrease. And that's a big leap of faith to come over here. And one of the things that's happened when I did that is God took care of me. In no way has God ever made me rich. But God has blessed me and He's blessed Mary with a good life, a comfortable life, a life where we have a good church family. God's blessed us to be in a place for 18 years that never have we had to have our kids move and go to different schools, but our kids have been able to be here. I believe God blessed me because I was willing to take a leap of faith. I believe God blesses those when we put our trust in Him. And trust me, I'm not always faithful in that. Each year I'm trying to learn to be better at it. But so often I look to the needs of myself before the needs of God. And what I want us to remember is what it means to trust in Him, to put our faith in Him, and to know that whenever we do that, He blesses us. I'm not going to give you empty promises that if you give $20, you'll find $20 in your pocket when you come home from church, but you'll find blessings in God. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 6 reads, "Remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Each of you should decide what you should give in your heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all you need, you will abound in every good work." So how much should we give? It's not a tenth, unless that's in your heart. It's not necessarily giving 25% of your income, unless that's in your heart. What it is God wants us to be cheerful givers. If you watch the kids come up here and put the little money in here, we're not doing it just for show, but the kids like it. Why? Because they're cheerful givers. Why are they cheerful givers? Because they're probably not giving their money, they're giving your money, right? But I want us to think the same way. The money that we give to God, the money we give to the church, the money we give to those in need, that's just money that was blessed to us by God. And when we give cheerfully, what does that show us? It shows us exactly of how God gave to us. God blessed us so much, and He asks us, trust in Him, and He'll bless us even more. This church is here to help you do good works. This church is here to help you learn to give to Him. This church is here for your prayers. If you have anything that we can do for you, please come while we stand and sing.